Great. Well, we'll get started then. Again, welcome. My name is Bill Cole. I'm a professor at the UT School of Public Health in Austin, the campus in Austin, and a member of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living, our associated research center. Welcome to the first of 10 seminars this summer, highlighting various sectors of the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. The first one, as everyone knows today, is focused on the military settings sector. See if I can get going here. This seminar series is a stakeholder engagement effort that's based on some work we're doing in Texas to develop and update a state-based physical activity plan that we've had in place since really 2008, 2009, when I first moved to Texas, and was sponsored by the Texas Governor's Council on Physical Fitness. The central tenet for what we do is that public health planning is central to improving population health. If you don't plan to do something, it's really hard to get it done. And Active Texas 2020 was a predicate, if you will, to the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. And yet Texas and West Virginia remain only two states that have standalone plans from which work can emanate and help increase the health of the population. So three must-haves, if you will. There's a need, obviously, to update the Texas plan for the future, since the Texas plan predates the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. There's a desire to bring this plan into alignment with the sector-based approach of the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. And specifically for these sessions this summer, there's a huge need and a desire to include ideas and opinions from all stakeholders. The general theme of what we are trying to do with the Texas State Physical Activity Plan is that all health is local. And bringing what we know from the federal level, evidence-based approaches for change from the federal level to state and local level is what the U.S. or is what Active Texas 2030 is meant to do. I do want to acknowledge the support of the Texas State Department of Health Services. Their generous support has helped make this series, as well as a revision of the plan, possible. We have technical and logistics support from the UT Health School of Public Health and the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. Liv George is here with us and running all the controls behind the scene. And then the U.S. National Physical Activity Alliance, which is our umbrella organization under which the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan is sitting. All those people have helped substantially in pulling this series together. There are 10 sectors in the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. We're leading off today with a focus on the newest sector, the military settings sector. And I'll list the others here. There will be a webinar for each of the additional settings here as we go forward the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for each of them. If you or colleagues have any interest in learning more about it, and particularly how these strategies and tactics of each of the sectors can be articulated to the state and local level. Here's a partial list of upcoming, some of the upcoming sessions. There's two more that we have to yet organize, but in addition to what we're talking about today, you can kind of see this, and the slides will be made available, obviously. But this will go out, and this is out on social media and other it's available elsewhere as well. And without further ado, I don't want to take any time from our guest speaker today. Dr. Dan Borenstein is the founding principal of D. Borenstein Solution. It's a limited liability corporation. He's spent quite a bit of time in academic settings, most recently at the Citadel in University in South Carolina. But he also, in one of the many hats he wears, is the chair of the military sector setting committee, the standing committee, if you will, for the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. And he's going to share us some of the work, the great work that they've put out and put forward. I will share also that Dan is just coming off a congressional briefing last week on the national plan, or on the military sector of the national plan, which was extremely well received. And so he's a hot commodity, as I was talking to him here a little bit earlier. So without any further ado, Dan Borenstein, please, Dan, it's all yours.
Bill, thanks so much. Thanks to all of you for joining today. I think the first thing I'll do is try to share my screen and my slides. Okay. So again, thanks to everybody for taking some time today. As Bill mentioned, I'm the chair of the brand new military setting sector. It was just formally publicly released, as Bill mentioned, during a congressional briefing that recently took place. So congratulations, you're the first audience, other than those who were part of that congressional briefing, to actually learn about this sector. And my aim today is to really try to find ways for you to understand what's some of the things that are happening in the military and ways in which you might be able to connect dots for action at state, municipal, local levels. I'll start by saying, Houston, we have a problem. And I don't just mean Houston, I actually do mean Texas and frankly the entire southern region. But this is results from a study that I led that was published in 2018. It was a collaboration with the U.S. Army Public Health Center, where we looked at the physical fitness levels and the musculoskeletal injury rates of all Army recruits over a 3-year span. So that was a total of a couple 100,000 individuals. And the hypothesis was that recruits coming from southern states, given we know that southern states have disproportionately worse public health outcomes and disproportionately higher rates of physical inactivity, that we might see that individuals coming from those states would be of both lower fitness and or higher risk for musculoskeletal injuries. And by the way, musculoskeletal injuries have been labeled the single greatest medical impediment to our military readiness. The DoD spends roughly $3.7 billion a year to treat these musculoskeletal injuries, which are most strongly associated with low physical fitness across both males and females. So Texas did pop as a state. As you can see on the top here, we have states according to fitness, basically ranked in quartiles. And Texas just managed to find its way out of the worst quartile for fitness, but was in the worst quartile for musculoskeletal injuries. So the essential takeaway theme from this research was that active living policies, as you can see here, should be vigorously pursued really across the country, but particularly in states that are known to be problematic. And for those of you who also may not know, almost across all branches right now, recruiting has become a major challenge for all branches. None of the branches are going to meet the Marines might, but mostly the branches are not going to meet their minimum standards for getting new recruits into their respective branch. So the idea of this paper really was to propose the idea that physical inactivity is not just a public health issue. It is a very real national security issue. And subsequent to this paper's release, there has been a lot of action up to and including the release of the military setting sector for the national plan. So I'm just going to briefly read this to you. You can read along with me, but This is the first paragraph in the introduction to the military sector, which says the military sector recognizes physical inactivity is more than a public health epidemic. It is also a significant threat to U.S. national security. Physical activity is vital to increasing the health and military readiness of our nation's warfighters and improving the quality and length of life among veterans, civilian employees of the U.S. Department of Defense and Department of Veterans Affairs, and the families of service members. The evidence-based recommendations within the military sector provide opportunities to realize practical and economic returns on investment that will simultaneously improve the health and security of our nation. So that's the premise under which the sector was developed. These were some of the organizations that were involved in the initial committee that developed the recommendations for the sector. You can see a pretty broad range of both government organizations, academia, and for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. Briefly, the process we undertook to develop the sector was that we convened an expert panel of truly, subject matter experts, individuals who live and breathe this concept every day, are struggling to deal with the fact that they're getting recruits who are less and less physically fit, and physical fitness and physical activity are even declining among members of the military, and also the challenges we face with our veterans. We broke that expert panel up into different subcommittees, and then developed some evidence-informed recommendations, and then engaged yet another group of subject matter experts to provide us with a review, what the military would call a sanity check on the recommendations that we were putting forth to ensure that they were in line with the struggles that the military and the VA are facing. So some of those existing programs and policies and initiatives that we are directly supported in the recommendations in the military sector include, of course, our National Defense Strategy, which is the overall strategic plan for defense in this country. Something called Total Force Fitness, which is a DoD-wide program which has a number of different components to it, some of which you can see here. Physical activity or fitness the physical quote-unquote pillar is one of those. The Army has developed their own version of Total Force Fitness in what the Army calls H2F, or Holistic Health and Fitness, and that too has an entire domain associated with physical readiness. And then there are a number of other programs, federal level programs that are listed here, and I'll talk a little bit later on about how perhaps there's some opportunities for those of you in Texas to connect with some of these programs. The content of the military sector is that it's organized around four specific populations: service members, and for those of you who don't know, service members, obviously, I think most of you know they exist across a number of different branches, right? Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and now Space Force. There are other federal sort of agencies as well, like the National Public Health Service and the Coast Guard. We include them in this group as well. What a lot of people don't realize is that the military, the armed services, also have different what they call components. There's an active component, which are our active duty service members who put on the uniform every day. That's their full-time job. And the active component only makes up about 50% of our armed forces. The other 50% are in what are called Compos 2 and 3, which are the reserve and guard elements. And as we've been fighting these wars overseas for the last decade and a half, we've been increasingly calling upon our guard and reserve elements. But these are people who don't put on the uniform every day. They're just putting it on when they're called into duty. So these are individuals who have other full-time jobs and yet need to maintain their readiness. And that's a challenge. The geographical dispersion for the Compos 2 and 3 is a significant challenge for those components. So there are opportunities for statewide efforts to help, in particular, Compos 2 and 3. So we have service members across all the branches and components. The families of those service members, recognizing, I think, as you all know, the importance of the social community and the social network. Veterans are also included. And civilians working for the DoD and VA, they're included because the DoD and VA are the largest employers in the entire country. So if we can improve physical activity and health just in those two large employers, we can have a significant impact on what's happening in the rest of the country. It's organized around, with those 4 populations in mind, 6 strategies, which I'll present in a minute, and then some examples of those, and then tactics and objectives. So they get increasingly more specific. The strategies are kind of broad, and then the tactics and objectives get increasingly more specific. And military folks in particular like specificity and they like action. So it was really a pleasure to work with a lot of senior military folks in developing this. The actual strategies are divided, again, here in 6 different areas, and the military would say that these are, quote unquote, racked and stacked. In other words, they are listed by priority, what everybody felt was the greatest level or area of priority. Leadership being the first, communication being the last. With that said, I would say that action in any one of these areas is going to make a difference and is important. But again, in the military area, they like to have things prioritized. So according to the folks who were involved in our group from the military, leadership was number 1, education and employment of qualified personnel number 2, surveillance and technology 3rd, physical activity and physical training programs 4th, partnerships 5th, and communication 6th. The basic idea is to break down silos. I think we all know that within our respective fields, we oftentimes exist in silos. So at the federal level, part of what we're proposing is a whole of government approach that includes not only DOD and VA, but HHS and Department of Education and Department of Transportation, and basically any agency that is either impacted by or has an impact on physical activity. We'd like them working together to solve some of these challenging problems. But we have those same opportunities, I would say, at state and local levels. So I'll provide you with a few examples that I thought might be helpful for, if Texas was going to try to, as Bill mentioned earlier, some sort of low-hanging fruit or opportunities at the state level. One recommendation is in the partnerships area. For those of you who aren't familiar with the program Building Healthy Military Communities, it is a pilot program that has some footing in the DoD and some in CDC. And Texas is actually one of the states that's part of the pilot. So I listed here the name of the Texas State Coordinator, Michael Hubbard, with some connections to him. But this is very much a public health approach. And one of the things that I'll say, too, is that the programs I mentioned earlier, like Total Force Fitness and Holistic Health and Fitness, are what the military would call Human Performance Optimization Programs, or HPO programs. The reality is that they're public health initiatives. And I think one of the greatest areas for connection is in evaluation of Total Force Fitness and Holistic Health and Fitness and others. So the military is starting to roll out on some of these areas, but public health folks really have the expertise in doing program evaluation. And I've said this, quite frankly, to some folks within the Army and some other areas that I feel as though they're missing an opportunity to have a much more robust evaluation component. With that said, this Building Healthy Military Communities initiative is very much a public health initiative, and fortunately, they do have a strong evaluation component that's built in. So in this particular strategy, which is partnerships and this tactic, it's using the DoD's United Facilities criteria. This is basically a master planning opportunity for the military, along with building healthy military communities, perhaps in collaboration with the national plans, transportation, land use, and community design, community recreation, fitness, and parks, and some other areas like the military sector. So again, the idea of, building bridges and breaking down silos. So again, building healthy military communities, I think, is one opportunity for the state of Texas. Another with the VA is what's called their Whole Health Initiative. So strategy 2 is education and employment of qualified personnel. And as some of you, as public health experts, again, as I mentioned earlier, bringing some of your expertise in program evaluation and maybe even program implementation, You can see whole health looks very similar to total force fitness. It has a number of different domains of human health or holistic health. And of course, physical is one of those domains. So here again, I think is an opportunity for collaboration with veterans and veteran-based organizations in and around the state of Texas. And as I mentioned, total force fitness, again, which is DoD-wide, but the physical activity and physical training programs, one of the recommendations here, Tactic 2, is to develop and implement comprehensive and immersive physical activity and physical training prescriptions for the U.S. Armed Forces to ensure delivery of safe and effective training. And the objective by 2024, the DoD should be in a position to comprehensively assess the physical activity and physical fitness of service members. So that's something I don't think they're particularly well positioned to do. And one of the opportunities, as I said earlier, for public health individuals to come in and work alongside some of the military folks. So those were just 3 examples of connections to the military sector of the national plan. But I think there are some other opportunities in Texas. So for example, I talked earlier about the National Guard. And I'll tell you in a moment about some efforts that I undertook while I was in South Carolina at the Citadel. But you've also got law enforcement, fire and EMS, and obviously in Texas, the Border Patrol has a strong presence. So I think that there's a real opportunity to, again, frame physical inactivity as an overall safety and security issue for the state of Texas, because law enforcement and firefighting and EMS, they face the same challenges that the military faces with respect to recruiting, maintaining a healthy and ready workforce, and so does the National Guard in Texas. So again, I think I'm not sure what stakeholders are here today on our call, but I would say if there isn't any representation from any of these organizations, that you all may be missing an opportunity to make some really good connections with some of these organizations. So that's really the extent of what I wanted to deliver formally, because I wanted to make sure that I left time for us to dialogue and discuss. So I think I've stopped sharing my screen. Bill, is that right?
You have, Dan. Thank you very much. Comprehensive kind of overview, if you will, to the military setting sector, as well as what can happen at the local level, which is, I think, extremely important for people joining us at the state and local levels, various agencies and the like. One thing I want to emphasize, please, we have lost my clock here. We have just over a half an hour, just under a half an hour, it looks like, for questions and answers and discussion. So I'd like to encourage people to either raise your hand or raise your hand virtually. We'll try to keep an eye on the attendance list here so that we can call on you for your question, or you can actually post the question in the chat room, in the chat box to the side in the WebEx space. We also have a active email address for this project, activetexas2030@uth.tmc.edu. Welcome comments. I welcome success stories or barriers, or what people are doing, say in El Paso at Fort Bliss, or in and around Fort Bliss, or at the VA, or any of the other places around the state where this is, as Dan has pointed out, not just becoming a health issue, it's becoming a national security issue for the United States. So to start the discussion off, I have put a few questions down here, and Dan already did his homework and put a few answers to the questions before the questions got asked out there. But just kind of very helpful to be thinking about this articulation for me at least, this articulation from a very centralized military settings approach, where most things come from the top down, to an area in public health that's a much more dispersed approach, whether it's a small town in the Rio Grande Valley, with like you said, a heavy Customs and Border Patrol population and their families, or a large place such as Fort Bliss, for example, on top, or Killeen in the United States, or in the central Texas, where there's huge populations of military, not just members, full-time members, but their families and associated people in the communities. So Dan did not focus on all of the strategies and tactics. I put in the chat box a link so that you could get to the entire National Physical Activity Plan there. But Dan, what is the lowest hanging fruit? People who are here who may want to know how they can take this good work that you and your committee have put together and do something with it, action-oriented public health. You listed a few things there, but where would someone start in this particular, in some of these things that you listed?
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. I think I'd answer that two ways. The first is, I think, engaging perhaps a broader range of stakeholders. So like I had said sort of on that last slide, if you don't have law enforcement at the table, or fire and EMS at the table, or if there's an armory, a National Guard armory in your community, if they're not at the table, I think they need to be at the table. And what I would say too is, in approaching them, I wouldn't go in sort of banging the drum of physical activity and health, or even public health for that matter. I would go in really trying to fully understand what their biggest pain points are and what their greatest challenges are. Because that does a couple things. One, it really helps, I think, build a nice rapport and build relationship. And it's sort of a cornerstone of community-based work, is going into the community and identifying what their own struggles are. So in terms of community-based participatory research, this isn't research, this is going to be action. But I think it's important to go in and ask some of those questions. And I think what's nice about, so again, I would approach it from a standpoint of how, I'd like to learn more about your organization. I'd like to learn what some of your challenges are. And perhaps there's some ways in which we can collaborate and work together. And perhaps there aren't. So if at the end of that conversation, or they're sort of saying what their pain points are, there's really nothing that you can offer them, then that's okay. The conversation ends. But I'm relatively certain that in having that conversation, as they're talking, you are going to identify some certain things that you may be working on, or capacities that you have that could be leveraged to help support their organization and bring their organization into the fold. So again, meeting them where they're at, I would say, is number one. And part of this too is trying to get buy-in also. The beauty, I think, of contextualizing physical inactivity as a safety and security issue is that it provides an opportunity for a much broader spectrum of political affiliations. So, typically, I think if we think of public health folks, they're probably more left-leaning. And if we think of sort of, military support and so on and so forth, they're typically more right-leaning. And I'm not making any judgments one way or the other. I'm just saying that I think there's room, by framing things as health and safety and security issues, you automatically, or you at least give yourself the opportunity to have a much broader range of individuals who want to come in and help. So I'd say the lowest hanging fruit is thinking about framing this as more than just public health, to include safety and security, and engaging the quote unquote, what we would call tactical professionals. So service members, law enforcement, fire, border patrol, as I had said earlier, and EMS.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Just looking, I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat box here. There's a couple of questions. Rather than me read them, if you're comfortable, unmute yourself and ask your question. We'll go to Sharmili, I guess Roy Sharmili first. Or Sharmili, I don't know which one's the first name. I apologize.
It's okay. It's Sharmili, Roy.
Sharmili, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just curious about, this idea of, I think it's like a very early stages, it seems like. Now it's still in the stages of probably finding those intersections and breaking silos. But I was curious about, like one area of that same type of like bringing left and the right together kind of is the idea of physical activity and workplace health kind of coming together. And I was just trying to think about how does that expand more into supporting those who are in the non-active military, who are probably not getting that training all the time, but are they in sedentary jobs? Are there workplace health in a place to sort of support them in keeping the readiness? And then in that, obviously, and tangentially can help all of the employees in that place also. So I was just kind of curious about if you or anybody else here has some thoughts or just comments on that.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Sharmili. There is an entire sector of the National Physical Activity Plan that's devoted specifically to this area, the business and industry sector. And I know you're going to be getting, that's part of the webinar series. So I think that there's probably the greatest answers for how to engage employers who maybe don't employ military folks would be through the recommendations in the business and industry sector. So that's, again, I think that's my response there. With that said, the great Tony Yancey, who some of you may or may not know, but is an esteemed colleague of mine and Bill's, who sadly passed away, gosh, Bill, I don't know how many years, 5 or 7, 10 years ago now. But one of the things that Tony did, she was at UCLA, was develop sort of a model for wellness in general. And one of the keys to her model was having a quote unquote spark plug, an individual who was going to help drive culture change. So, it's conceivable that an employer maybe who does have an individual who is a service member and is very much into physical activity and physical fitness, perhaps that individual can be the spark plug within that workplace setting to bring along their coworkers, military or non-military, to engage in more physical activity. So that's how I would answer, Sharmili. I hope that answers your question, and feel free to ask a follow-up if necessary.
Great. And as Dan said, there will be a specific webinar on the business and industry sector. One of the things we've been trying to do, I'm in a leadership position with the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan, and one of the things we've been trying to do, Charlie, and everyone is this idea of cross-sector communications. How can the business and industry sector, with its and that was done on purpose many years ago, with its strategies and tactics, merge, or if you will, find a common area in a Venn diagram with the military settings sector, like people who might be employing National Guard members who have a day job and then serving as a National Guard when needed and in a monthly kind of capacity. That's a work in progress. I think if you have examples, or if anyone has examples or suggestions on how to do that, particularly as we work towards updating the Texas Physical Activity Plan, that I hope we'll find some silos breaking down in that area where appropriate. Please don't hesitate to let us know. I see a question from John Fennell. My friend John, or at least a statement. John, you want to give us some comments here?
Sure. So my name is John Pennell. I'm here at the South Texas VA. I'm the program manager for whole health. And so we're in about year 4 of implementation of this whole health system of care, and working with all of the VAs in Texas. Visit 17 is the heart of Texas VA. And so there really is this kind of push towards a more person-centered health approach that's focused on health behavior and health promotion as kind of the foundation for the delivery of care within the VA. So it's really exciting. One of the other things we're doing that I think is important for this discussion is really kind of trying to bridge that gap between active duty military and their veteran status, and making sure they're getting that experience. And so the experience of whole health or total force fitness or whatnot in their military service, but making sure that becomes kind of a way of life for them, and that they're ready to continue that once they get into the VA. And honestly, we're seeing a lot of great outcomes, and but there's a lot of implementation opportunities, I can tell you that, and a lot for us to learn.
John,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and could you maybe highlight what you perceive to be some of the biggest challenges that you face with respect to implementation, maybe even evaluation of whole health?
Sure. So there's probably over 21 studies that are going on nationally around whole health implementation and different aspects of that currently. But I would say just some of the bigger challenges are, this is a cultural transformation. And so you're dealing with changing the leadership's mind about what healthcare looks like and how it's delivered. It's the providers and their professionalization that you're kind of dealing with as well, as trying to change their mind, as well as the veterans. And we've all been working under this find it, fix it model, and not one that's kind of geared towards health promotion and self-care and self-management of disease. And so every aspect of our delivery of care, we have to change how we're thinking about what health is and what health care is.
Yeah, that's helpful, John. And if you look historically at some of the greatest advancements in both clinical medicine and public health in this country, they've come from the VA or the DoD. Mm-hmm. So one of the, I think, great opportunities perhaps within Texas is for some partnership with the VA and or National Guard, whatever it may be, or a military installation, to use that as sort of a test case, as an example of how things could be rolled out in other parts of the state that are not necessarily populations directly associated with the VA or DoD. But again, there's a lot of capacity. Well, there's sometimes a lot of capacity in the VA and DoD, and they really are progressive in doing this. VA is very progressive in this whole health initiative. So, the opportunity to use, again, the VA or a DoD-based organization as an example for what could be done across the rest of the state, I think is a great opportunity. And so I'll leave it at that.
Great, and thanks for your talk today.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Go
ahead. Yeah.
Bill, let me just go back to one other potential answer to the low-hanging fruit question.
Please.
Which is that I think one of the challenges we face in this sort of physical activity and public health space is, we often get asked about the question of return on investment. And when we're looking at chronic physical conditions, diabetes, heart disease, and stroke, and so on, sometimes those outcomes are so distal that it can be hard to demonstrate shorter term return on investment. But I think one of the opportunities that we have right now, particularly coming out of the global pandemic, and given the attention that has now been brought to mental health and the relationships that we know exist for the both proximal and distal impacts that physical activity can have on things like stress and anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, which, oh, by the way, rates of which are significantly higher in military and first responder communities. Therein lies, I think, a tremendous opportunity to look at outcomes that maybe we haven't necessarily focused on in the past. So looking at the associations or outcomes that physical activity can have on mental health, I think is a low-hanging fruit, frankly, that we haven't done maybe a good enough job of working on. So again, in terms of engaging with those communities, they are deeply concerned about these issues. Again, as some may know, statistics vary a little bit, but on the order of 25 veterans commit suicide on a daily basis. So I know that at least at the national level, there's an entire strategic plan to prevent veteran suicide. So again, I think there's a lot of opportunities to look at physical activity and mental health in any population, but particularly in populations where it's even higher, which are the ones that I've been talking about today.
Right, great. Pivot to Myra Rodriguez, who posted some things there in a comment. Myra?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. So it's a pleasure to hear all this information. I really enjoyed the breakdown. Absolutely, the information that you're presenting as far as wanting to work with CBOs, community-based organizations, and trying to bridge that gap between different sectors is absolutely in line with what I am trying to do with my company. So I work for Unitas, which is a national company, and we are also statewide here in Texas. And we started out here in Texas, partnered with Texas Veterans Network and Texas Serves RGV. And so these are large networks of organizations that all serve veterans. And they decided they really wanted to coordinate care a little bit better across sectors. So whether it was a county program or maybe the UTRGV or an educational institution had a veterans program or veteran services. So how do we connect all of them together? How do we connect them with the VSOs, right? But also to different types of social care. So maybe just connecting them to the local food bank, to mental behavioral health programs, free programs, right, that are out there that most veterans don't even know about. And that falls in line with, the VA and the whole health. And basically that's, like you were saying just a little while ago, is connecting those dots, right? So it's physical health can help mental behavioral health, right? So those two fall in line together. I know the VA also does well-beats, right? So a lot of people actually don't know about that. They don't know that they have these free physical fitness classes down here in South Texas. I know that they have them. I'm actually based out of Harlingen, Texas, so I've actually been to some of those classes here at the Harlingen VA. So really trying to get all these organizations, and they have been for the last couple of years using the Unitas platform, which is a referral platform. At any organization, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, you can actually use our platform to send and receive referrals for veterans. And so that's how I guess you could say is kind of a good example of what we're doing here in South Texas as far as veteran CBOs, right? So veteran CBOs working together to be able to make sure that we increase access to care for the veterans and increase health equity in turn. So I like I said, I like what everybody's saying, but what I have seen, you're naming kind of the top organizations, right? We're the bottom little CBOs. Is we're trying to make that connectivity, like you said, and have top work with the bottom. And so I feel like that's still very much a huge silo. So I just wanted to get your take as far as how accessible do you think it will be for, Texas Veterans Network or Texas Serves RGV to be able to work with those top organizations, those statewide or municipal, to make those partnerships? Because I do a lot of outreach for them, and I want to make sure that we are serving our veterans and getting them that help that they need, whether it be mental behavioral health or physical health or whole health.
Yeah, I mean, I might, again, sort of facilitating conversation and putting on the hat of professional dot connector, which is, I think, a big part of what I do. Perhaps connecting with John Finnell, who's on today's call and at the VA. I know that one of the, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think roughly 50% of veterans actually use the VA healthcare system, and there's another 50% that don't access that. And so I think there may be an opportunity just to engage with the local VA about that. And I don't know that you necessarily need to connect to things at the national or federal level. But I think, trying to connect with local VA medical centers might be a good pathway forward. And, as John mentioned earlier, one of the really tricky pieces is the transition from wearing the uniform, quote unquote, to moving into becoming a veteran. So I think there is a real opportunity to connect with the National Guard in your area and law enforcement in your area, because a lot of those individuals are probably veterans, or they at least live a military lifestyle, or they may be Guard members who are getting ready to transition. So just like John was saying earlier, trying to sort of help them with a way of life as they're transitioning into veteran status, maybe another way to get connected a little bit more at a local level. I don't know if you have a National Guard armory on or around you or near you, or a VA medical center on, around, or near you. But certainly there's going to be a law enforcement agency and a fire agency that's going to be near you. So I would say, again, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps reaching out to them.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Did you have something else, Myra? I'm sorry. I hope I didn't cut you off.
Oh, no, I said just thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Some additional comments and connections being made in the chat box. I'm interested as we wrap up here with the last few moments, 9 minutes or so, to hear from and you've got some good examples, the whole health framework and Myra's example of community-based organizations, which are incredibly critical, not just in Rio Grande Valley, but elsewhere. And in fact, as we move towards this idea of a state physical activity plan, that's where it gets implemented. It's not going to be coming from Austin. It's not going to be coming from DSHS necessarily. The framework will be provided, but how to make these connections, how to bridge these barriers, things we've been talking about today, is the theme of all health is local is not just a tagline. I think it's a very real. It's the reality in public health. Things don't happen unless there are spark plugs, there are leaders, there are connectors, there are people who have a framework within which to work. So others who might have joined us, are there any examples of barriers that need to be overcome in this area to try to get at some of this low-hanging fruit that Dan has been talking about? You can just go ahead, we're small enough, you can open your mic if you want to join and point out some examples that might happen.
Hello?
Yes,
Hi.
Please join us.
Hi, my name is Belinda, and I work for the School of Public Health in Brownsville with UT Health Science Center. And mine is a little more like on a personal comment. My son is a veteran, and he's a border patrol now. But I am concerned, and I am really thankful to you all for your hard work and for bringing all this up. Because I was just speaking to him the other day. I do not know what is going on with law enforcement. I know that there is a lot of different scenarios, and what people's lives are different. But I can give an example of my son. You know, he went to the VA in Harlingen last week for a physical. And it turns out that yes, they did recommend and refer him to. He is apparently diagnosed with PTSD. So he was talking to me about it, and he was saying to me, "Mom, you know, this might be some of the reasons they say that I just don't have this motivation." I mean, he's a dad now, you know, so he's got a busy life, and as a border patrol and helping with the kids, and so try to balance life. But the little bit of time he has extra, I just couldn't understand what the lack of motivation is. And I feel that it does have something to do, those barriers, with mental health. And he can have what he needs, like a gym membership. I work with public health, and I also work with nutrition. So I give him guidance in that way. But I said, there's got to be something here, because you have the resources, but yet you can't find yourself to do it. So I asked him, I said, son, when you go train, you all go train to use your weapons, and you're being trained in all these different ways so that you all can be successful at what you're doing out there as a border patrol. I said, what about your health? Like, what about, you know, giving y'all trainings like to go and run physical activity, and do you all have a nutritionist there with border patrol? um, because his intention is to get healthier. He's borderline diabetic, hypertension, all these things run in the family. So I can try to give him all the guidance. He can have all the resources, but there's some type of block. So I just told him, look, when we work with our local clinics, with School of Public Health, we're in coalition with the clinics. I said, we have a plan of action for our patients who are diabetic. We don't just say you got to eat healthier. You know, we have the pharmacists there. We have the counselors there, community health workers. We have gym memberships for them. Challenges between agencies to say, you know what, the Border Patrol is going to versus the police department, and try to have challenges so that they can participate and work on their health, and, you know, work as a group. So I kind of just, I am concerned about my son. And I've told him, you know, if something happens at work and you're in a situation where you need to run or do something for your life, or for one of the citizens' lives, and but you can't perform that because you're now, you know, about 50 pounds, 60 pounds heavier, you're in no condition to be running in this hot sun and stuff. So as a mother, like, I can say that to my son, and be comfortable to where he can talk to me about it. But sometimes I just got to point those things out to him. And I wonder all the time, like, are they doing anything there? Like, are they letting him know of programs, or, you know, somewhere he can go? And maybe they should just require, right, like a training for them, to where they can actually try to get fit and have nutritionists on board to help them and guide them. And, you know, aside from the VA, which I'm so glad that someone was there to evaluate him and point that out, and refer him to start talking about, you know, what he might be feeling or going through when he was overseas, you know. So I am concerned as a mother, first as a mother, as a grandmother, because, you know, my grandkids are having to sometimes will get the short end of the stick if he's not feeling healthy and he's overwhelmed with work. But then yet he's got all these mental blocks and barriers that he has not really come to terms with. So what can we expect from them if there's all these barriers? We can say, you know, it is now becoming so big, and it's a concern. but what are we doing to help them?
Yeah,
I'm sure it's enough.
I absolutely hear in your voice your concern, and that story is all too common. And I would say if you look in the chat, there are some individuals who've posted some potential resources that are available to your son. Yeah, I think the fact that he's gone to the VA is wonderful, and I would just continue, I guess, to encourage him to pursue opportunities to work with the whole health program and to get back among somebody else mentioned this in the chat, his brothers and sisters, that there is a culture that exists in the military that may or may not exist in the Border Patrol. I have done some work with them, but not intimately. But I think there is an opportunity to connect back with others and share in that experience. And that part of that is physical, and that can bleed over obviously into the mental. One last thing I'll say is that there have been some pilot studies on the impact of yoga for improving both the physical and mental health of service members and veterans, and it's proving to be a highly beneficial activity. It's often perceived as not particularly masculine, so that can be problematic. But there is a great podcast that you might turn them on to called Guys Talking Yoga. I could put that into the chat, but Guys Talking Yoga. Again, it's just I'm trying to help you with your son.
Yes.
But I would say there are some recommendations in the chat for some ways for him to connect to, I think, veterans and others in his community. And I would encourage me personally investigating the possibility of yoga and yoga with other brothers and sisters in arms, or formerly.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Terrific. Well, we're near the top of the hour. And first of all, I want to thank Dan Borenstein for joining us and his leadership in this particular area. This is the newest sector for the National Physical Activity Plan, and he's done an outstanding job as a leader to bring this over a year and a half, I guess, when he first started doing all this, to a nice new shiny area of focus for the U.S. National Physical Activity Plan. So, Dan, thank you for joining us, but thank you also for your leadership. I'd like to make sure that the Texas Department of State Health Services gets acknowledged, as does the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living here in Austin and the UT School of Public Health, and then also the support of the U.S. National Physical Activity Alliance. Please join us if you have any interest at all in the other sectors. It will be a smorgasbord in the next few weeks of a foci, if you will, in each of the sectors. On Friday between 2 and 3 Central Time, we'll hear from Dr. Liz Joy, who's the chair of the Healthcare Sector Standing Committee, about some of their recommendations as well as successes. So if you know people who are working in the healthcare sector, it'd be highly appropriate to join in.
I'm one of the moderators for this presentation.
Hello?
I think that was our cue.
Yeah, I guess that was the hook to get me pulled off. Anyway. Please continue to join us. And if you have any questions or comments, want to emphasize some success stories or barriers, please email at activetexas2030@uth.tmc.edu. The slides as well as the recordings will be made available as soon as we clean things up. And we are right a little bit over, so I'll call it for today. I hope everyone has a good day and stays warm, or stays cool, and we'll see you again. Thanks so very much.